I just got back from seeing X-Men First Class, or should I say X First Class, as it's actually shown in the title, but we'll call it X-Men First Class. I really like this film. I do highly recommend that you go out and see it. It's a fun film. It's a well put together film. It's pretty good scripting, pretty decent acting. There is some bad CGI, which we'll get to that in a bit. We'll get to it when I get to my peeves and issues I had with the film. Uh, but overall, highly, highly positive. In fact, I think this is my favorite X-Men film thus far. At least that's what I'm saying right now. As you all know, sometimes initial reactions change, but I'm fairly positive that even if this drops to maybe my second or third favorite X-Men film, this is still a really good movie. I loved it, and it had a really, really good feel. How should I put this? Well, let's start at the beginning. Now, the beginning should seem very familiar to anybody who's seen X-Men films because it's literally the first scene from the first X-Men film. I'm not talking about them remaking the scene. No, I'm saying they actually used the first scene and added in one extra shot of a Kevin Bacon. Not, we'll get to that. Kevin Bacon standing in a window overlooking it. But yeah, you see Magneto have his little gate pole thing, and then we cut to Nazi Kevin Bacon, which is what I said as soon as I saw him. He has a little Schindler pin on him. And he actually speaks fairly good German. I know I made a comment in the Mortal Kombat videos about I wonder if these actors sound good in Japanese. I do speak a little German, and his German was pretty good. I think there was one or two questions I had with the translation of some of the words, but yeah, that's translation stuff. But yeah, it was just funny to see a Nazi Kevin Bacon trying to encourage Eric Langshire to young Eric Langshire to use his magnetic powers to pull the coin. He brings his mother in there. Let's say does something bad to her that results in several Nazis' heads being crushed. Not his though. Oh, by the way, his character Kevin Bacon is Sebastian Shaw, which is a character, another villain from the comic books, obviously. Kevin Bacon, I must say, actually did a very good job. I haven't seen Kevin Bacon in anything in a while. Like the only thing I can really think of recently that I've seen Kevin Bacon in is that commercial for that DirecTV where he's playing his ultimate fan. So I'm really happy to see him back. If anything, this makes playing 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon a lot easier. But he actually plays a surprisingly good villain, a surprisingly good badass 60s swinging villain. And when I mean he's a 60s swinging villain, he's really a Bond villain in this one. I'm talking about he's going full Bond style, which is the other thing I really have to talk about. The first 2/3 of this film really feel like a 60s spy, a swinging 60s spy movie. They really nailed that in that film. A lot of the stuff with Charles Xavier at first does feel like it takes place in the real 60s. But everything with Sebastian Shaw is very much like how Hollywood was like in the 60s. He's got a submarine, and he's decked out most of this submarine like it's a fucking yacht. Like, he has, pleasure cabins on there. He's got bars and stuff. The only thing he doesn't have on there apparently is an ice machine. And considering how he's laid this thing out, I am shocked that his character at some point goes, we need an ice machine. Remove this stuff, and we'll put the ice machine here. Sir, that's the life support system. Remove it. Because he's really decked out everything. And somehow this machine, this sub, despite being nuclear powered and it being the 60s, only needs 2 people to be operated. Go figure. This guy's got some great 60s tech, I guess. But if you see it, the layout is very you really should expect a Bond villain, or this really seems like a Bond film. They have the Hellfire Club, which has got secret passages all over the place. His outfits and his henchmen's outfits are very Bondish as well. And then, of course, later on in the film, Charles Xavier winds up hooking up with the CIA. And they actually basically start at least in this incarnation of the X-Men, I don't think this is how it started off in the comics, but the X-Men actually start off as a CIA group who who got a, I guess, breakaway semi leave, which is an interesting spin. I guess it fits a little bit more. I like it. It adds to the whole spy thing. I mean, there's a very strong Cold War Cold War feel to it. The other thing this movie really channels is also the Nazi hunting films of the 60s and the 70s. Lawrence Belcher, not Lawrence Belcher. It's the looking at IMDb here. Michael Fassbender, who was Stelios from 300, is probably where most people recognize him from. Is playing young Magneto. Is basically, at least the first third of the movie, is basically just hunting down Nazis and trying to find Kevin Bacon's character. And he is incredibly badass. I wish we saw more of this Magneto hunting down Nazis. If there is more of this that they cut out, I want to see that in a director's cut. He is such a badass as he's hunting down these Nazis and killing them. There's a great scene in the bar where he basically kills an entire room. Well, 3 guys, but kills an entire room of Nazis. He goes tortures a banking Nazi, and he does a really good performance as that. I prefer him even over James McAvoy. I think that's how you pronounce his name. For those of you new to this channel, I often get actors' names completely wrong. Though I like James's portrayal of Charles Xavier. He didn't fully channel Patrick Stewart, but I don't think you had to. I mean, you basically did have like 30 years of stuff happen between films, so that you can use that to explain the difference. And in this one, he's literally just got his PhD. So he's like 23, 24, I believe. Who else? The actress that got to do Mystique, though, I think was a little off. Well, first of all, Mystique is a slut in this film. I mean, she's kind of hooking up with Beast, Hank McCoy, and then later on she sleeps with Magneto. Yeah, there's spoilers alert from this point on. That's not a big spoiler. It's really a side plot to explain kind of why Magneto basically gets her to start walking around nude. It is the 60s, after all. And then we know later on that she sleeps with another character from this, was it Azazel? I think that's, again, people are going to be like, dude, what the fuck? You can't pronounce these names? I'm sorry, I can't. But anyway, you know, she later sleeps with him because then they have Nightcrawler as a child. So Mystique really is a slut at this point. Although they did give some explanation to why she still appears young. I mean, I guess they could have get away. No, she really is 70. She just happens. They say she ages about half the rate of a human, so they say right in there, when she's 40, she'll still look like she's a teenager. So that kind of explains why she's still looking good in the latter films. Although it does kind of feel off now that, you know, because, well, I have to explain this. Basically, Charles and Mystique kind of grow up together. He finds her in his kitchen, and he says, "Yeah, we have plenty of food." She was going to steal from him. "You have plenty of food. You can, stay here." And basically becomes his surrogate sister, and he becomes her surrogate brother. And that's what makes it really weird, I guess, in perspective in the latter films, that Xavier doesn't have more of a feelings about her, concentrate more on her. It's almost like you kind of feel like you want to recut these films a bit to incorporate that, because that's a rather interesting relationship. I mean, there's constant talk about how Magneto and Charles were friends, and in this one they were friends for like a month, and it was an important friendship. Yeah, Xavier really went into his mind and really understands him and such. So I guess they had that shared thing, but to then never really mention Mystique much, and the fact that these two characters now basically grew up as brother and sister together. In fact, Mystique kind of starts hitting on Charles at points too. Gets really jealous of every other woman he starts hitting on, which I have to his pickup line. He's got like the same pickup routine, which he uses on pretty much everyone to explain like little mutations in their hairs and stuff, and it's just fun to see that. But it is kind of weird, I think, in the perspective. Now, I know this director really didn't want to be bound to what was done in the other films, and I can kind of understand that, but really, that really adds a whole new element into there, and it's not kind of weird end scene in the rest of the film, I guess. Should I get now that I'm kind of getting into pet peeves, I should probably get into a few other things, but I need to mention a few of the other cameos because there's a ton of cameos in there. Michael Ironside shows up as a U.S. admiral, like commanding this fleet, which was always fun to see Michael Ironside. He always brings intensity to his roles. I think that's actually, other than like name dropping hint stuff, there's not a whole lot more cameo wise, but I should talk. Well, yeah, since we're on continuity, the White Queen, not the White Queen, Emma Frost. Well, she is kind of the White Queen. I think there's some sort of retconning going in there with X-Men Origins Wolverine. Because we had a character that was implied to be Emma Frost, and they never did. I think. I'm trying to think back. I don't think they mentioned her by name. If I'm wrong, just post it there because that'll change it. But Emma Frost is clearly stated who she is in this film. But in X-Men Origins Wolverine, we had a character that was Wolverine's girlfriend's sister who could turn into diamonds. Now, we could always just attribute to that's just another mutation. That's just another mutant. It's not Emma Frost. I forget if they said her by name. She's Emma. But this one's clear. Not only can she turn into the diamonds, she's psychic. I guess you could probably connect it to that there. Maybe mother and father. There's a lot of mother and father stuff. We see Cyclops' father is in this one, which I guess explains how he got roped in. But that's another one that kind of messes up. I mean, if he's already part of the X-Men, his father is, I guess we could maybe explain that's why Xavier homed in on Scott Summers in X-Men Origins Wolverine. I mean, I guess that does tie in with that. That's why he picked out Scott to kind of recruit, because I guess he'd been following him. He knew how to track him the easiest. That's my guess. Although I guess the other cameo we have to talk about, because this was my favorite scene in the entire film, was the Hugh Jackman cameo as Wolverine. Let me set the scene here. Basically, there's a scene where Magneto and Xavier are going around recruiting their first wave of mutants. Now, I'm going to get back to this in a bit, but the last person they get to is Wolverine. They go and they walk into the bar and they go, "Hello, my name is Charles Xavier. This is Eric Lancher." And Hugh Jackman just turns around, looks at him, and goes, "Fuck off," and goes back to drinking his drink. And it's the way he does it. It's really like, really fuck off. And it was quite comical. Got a big laugh with the audience. And it goes back to showing it, like, really holding on a shot of him as like drinking his whiskey. Like, the director, I think, really kind of geeked out. I'm filming Wolverine. I'm going to hold this as long as possible. But I do digress there because, well, I guess you could kind of explain that this was occurring in between. When we go back to X-Men 3, we see Xavier and and Eric going around, and they're going to Jean Grey's house. The whole I like this one setup. I guess you could say that happened. They just didn't take her that particular time. Really, this whole Charles and Magneto relationship was supposed to have occurred for several years. In this one, it's really shown to only be a month before all the he splits off with him, and I think that's a failure of this film. I think they should have kept that relationship, shown where the divisions were going, but not actually have them break off into two separate groups at that point. I know that's probably but the fans wanted to see him become Magneto in this film. Especially if they make this into another trilogy or another franchise, they need to have this. Somebody needs to smack them, because that's where you want to see the next film go. Is see the division, see them kind of united, see how. I almost feel like there's probably a second cut of this somewhere, where he also winds up getting into the wheelchair in this scene in this movie too. I really felt like they should have left this off and left it so we could have implied that there was at least a couple more years of a relationship between them before the group broke apart. I really feel it was a little, from the whole narrative wise. Now, like I said before, this director didn't want to be tied down to the other movies. You could tell that's why he chose to set in the 60s. Now, the other point I have is probably the more controversial of the points, but it's they really overhit on the we're talking about mutants, but we're talking about homosexuality in this one. And there's a couple reasons I kind of felt. One, it's because it lost the subtlety that Singer had when he was handling it. You want to put messages in your film, but you don't want to hit your audience over the head with it. And the stuff with Hank McCoy especially, they so overhit. And Mystique, I'm a mutant and I'm proud. Oh, it was like, oh, come on. That was too much. They went too far with that line that from the first. Why don't you stop being have you ever thought about not being a mutant type thing? And they kind of hit that too much, especially. And the other part is you're really missing out what the real story of the X-Men is. The kind of modern joke, or not joke, but the modern thing. Oh, it's always about all different groups that feel isolated and all that stuff. But in the 60s, it was quite clear what the X-Men were filling in for, what they were actually talking about. And it was race relations. And you're here now in the 60s, you have the height of the civil rights era, and there's almost no relaying the any of the civil rights stuff. There's a slight hint at one of the characters when they mentioned slavery. Magneto mentioned slavery to him, or was it Sebastian Shaw? Either way, there's a slight hint. They really should have hammered on that there's these racial tensions growing in the United States. That's really where the X-Men were always supposed to be a substitute for. The homosexuality thing was just added in later after civil rights was starting to die down and that issue was somewhat solved. I say somewhat. At least not as much in the popular mind. They were trying to fill in with something else. And I think this completely replacing it doesn't fit in as smoothly because everything was designed to be more around the race relations of the 60s. Magneto and his group is supposed to be the Black Panthers. Charles Xavier is supposed to be Martin Luther King and his group. That's really where the X-Men are their strongest at. Again, a hard thing to do now because we don't have the same race relations as we had back in the 60s. For one thing, it's gotten a lot more complicated because there's a lot more groups that are independently asserting their own rights, their own movements. There's also what I would call the graying of the line nowadays, where as been marked is the number of mixed races and how people are kind of treating mixed race relations, or at least mixed race children, and how they see themselves. Some of the articles I've read now, it's more traditionally it was always you're mixed, but you're just considered more of the whatever your minority group is. And now it's not quite so. I'm getting off topic on that, but I think that's kind of the point. Is there's so much more that they can do with the X-Men. They kind of stick too much with the homosexuality undertones, and just hammer it in way too much in those scenes. It's not a killer, but I felt it wasn't done right. It wasn't done with the subtlety that Singer handled it with. Now, maybe I'm mistaken here, because Singer was involved in this movie to some degree, and maybe he decided he wanted to go further with that ideal. If that's the case, shame on you, Singer, because you hit the right tones before. People like there are basically this is science fiction. In science fiction, the really successful science fictions hide their messages much more subtly than this. It's clear, but it's much more subtle. That's good science fiction. You shouldn't be, like Avatar, hitting your audience over the head with it. But it wasn't a showstopper. But it was my complaint. More the complaint is the complete ignoring of the race relation stuff. That should have been in there, and it's another reason why they should have put not broken up the X-Men into the Brotherhood and the X-Men much sooner. I really felt that they probably, if they're going to do a second film, they should have dealt with that in the second film. This was kind of way too rushed. It should have really been about them building this relationship and having the world kind of realize that there's mutants. Even if it's not the whole world in general, at least, the elites in both the Soviet Union and Russia. And then you should have kept back to, 2 years later in the next film and really showed that's where the relationship is dividing. There's a lot more I could talk about this film. I should mention the CGI, because I said it was before. A couple of scenes, the CGI, especially with the diamonds. I didn't think the diamonds looked good on Emma Frost. They looked way too CGI-ish. And some of the Magneto's metal bending looks really bad, really rushed CGI. And considering they're inanimate objects, they should have been the easiest to do photorealistic. But they're not. I've gone on far too long, I think, at this point. I hope you enjoyed the review. Stay tuned. I forget what comes out next week. Is it Green Lantern? I don't know. I will find out. Of course, that's assuming I see it in theaters. Alright, signing off for now. Bye.